Hey everyone, we are live on the Overland podcast. Thank you for joining us. My name is Joey. They call me the Professor. I'm here with my personal mechanic, Tony. Who,
Tony,
anytime I have anything wrong with my FJ, he figures how to work on Toyotas. And
I'm here for you, bro.
I appreciate you.
Yeah.
It's been a lot of YouTube for us in the past, figuring out how to put front end parts on and different things like that. And I just want to let you know, thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate you.
Yeah. No problem. Anytime.
Well, I'm recovering from a weekend trip of backpacking. My wife and I just walked 26 miles over
On
3 days,
purpose?
over seven
I was just saying,
mountains. Yeah.
why would you do that?
On
Uh,
purpose?
we had to hitchhike around control burns. We crossed over 40 water crossings, but
my
it
gosh.
was amazing weather. Nights around the fire were great. And anyway, my feet hurt, my back hurts, but we're back at it. So here we are. But I am excited about our guest this evening
Yes,
as we
sir.
do this live show. So if you're watching or listening, we will be live. You can join in with your questions and comments. We have with us this evening Patty Upton. Patty, thank you for being with us. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
She is joining us from. We're not going to disclose her location. She is hidden in a bunker somewhere, ready to get out and go do a few things. But you can follow her and see what she's doing on Instagram at Sandship Discovery, and also at a new place that you may not have seen at TNT.Tried and True as she gets ready for the Rebel Rally this fall.
Right on.
So that's pretty cool. And also on her website at outbackofbeyond.com. So, Patty, I love how on your website you introduce yourself. You call yourself a mom, a lifetime Girl Scout, a hopeless romantic, a voracious reader, and Lauren Lee Upton's traveling companion and wife. I love how you introduce yourself. That's so cool.
Yeah.
What's in a nutshell?
Yeah, in a nutshell, do you what do you speak very highly of your late husband, Lauren, and most of your story includes your time with him. How did you meet?
My ex-husband introduced us. Well, at
Wow.
the time, he
Oh,
wasn't my ex-husband, but yeah.
that's a good story.
We were living in the Canal Zone in Panama at the time. This was back in late 75. And anytime a vehicle showed up down there looking as Lawrence, was driving at that time. This was in 75. He was driving, I think it was a 72 Ford F-250, specially outfitted. He put duals on the back. He had this massive bumper with this 5,000 pound or 50,000 pound winch. I mean, massive winch on the front end and California license plates. And when you see something like this, you think, oh, this guy thinks he's driving to South America from here. Little does he know. Well, that was basically what it was. And so my husband brought him home for dinner. And we worked with Boy Scouts at the time, my husband and I did. And we were sponsored by the Air Force Tropical Survival School. So we had a lot of contacts that we kind of put Lauren in touch with for medical supplies, maps, which were practically non-existent, other contacts that might have more information about the Darien Gap, that sort of thing. So that's kind of how I met him first. It was at that time. And at
Wow.
that time, I was probably of the right age to do something like this, but I was not of the right mind. I keep thinking, I'd only been married for a couple of 3-4 years, and I was working. My husband was working. So yeah, we were settled into a life at that time. So we did our best to help him and get him off on the right foot.
Oh,
Nice.
that's interesting. Did you really know what you were getting into when the two of you got together?
Well, I had done some reading of Lauren's journals from his past trips, and I had read the British had gone through from in the 70s, 72, 73, 74, 74. I probably have it here somewhere. With whenever the Range Rovers came out, the year the Range Rovers came out is when the British went through. They were going to show off how great the Range Rovers were. And they were doing this trip from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego. And they got to the Darien Gap and they found out that the Range Rovers weren't going to do that well. And they actually airlifted a secondhand Land Rover in. And that's what helped them get through. So it was one of those things I've read about. I'd seen a little film about it. So I knew of it. I knew from people that I'd helped in my earlier years when I was still living at home. I'd met some young backpackers that came through, and they stayed with us for a few days, and they were backpacking through. So in fact, we took care of their vehicle they had a vehicle they had driven down to Panama, but they were going to backpack through the jungle and then come back to Panama, take their vehicle and drive back to the States. So, I mean, I'd helped another man back in early 70s on a bicycle that wanted to go through the Darien Gap. So I knew of it. I knew that there were this obstacle down there. This was not something that you took on lightly. It wasn't, it's not a weekend trip out into the woods somewhere. You have to be able to prepare and plan, and logistics are by far more difficult than the trip. I mean, if you can winch one hill, you can winch 50 hills. If you can build one raft, you can build 3 rafts. But it's the logistics when it comes down to the men you've hired to work for you, to search trail, find trail, clear trail, feeding these people, because that was part of their agreement to work, was they were to get fed, making sure that they were fed, that they had their supplies, that that they had what they needed. And so it was she has a book. I need to read all these stories. We're working on a book.
Oh, good.
Yeah, we are working on it. Hopefully later this year. We'll see. But logistics are by far more difficult than the actual trip.
Well, speaking of logistics, you point out on your website that all of your expeditions occurred before internet, before GPS, before Google, before cell phones, before even digital cameras. How much harder does that make the logistics and the planning?
Probably a lot. Although when I look online and there's so much information out there that doesn't necessarily mean it's all true.
True.
When you're getting up to a border crossing, it's a gamble. I mean, even today, it's probably still a bit of a gamble. But I know my husband and I did a trip to Panama. We did a trip to Panama overland in 2016 or 17 in our Dodge. See, I had never driven from Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, where Lauren started, to Panama. I didn't join till Panama.
Right.
So one summer we drove from here in Idaho to Alaska and back. And then one winter we drove from here in Idaho to Panama and back. And having the internet, I was able to know more or less what was going to be required at every border. And having traveled internationally, I also knew you have half a dozen to a dozen copies, well, probably more than that, for each border crossing of your passport, your driver's license, your insurance papers. You have all of this in a folder so that when you get there, you can, when they say, well, you have to go down the corner to get a photocopy. No, I've got a photocopy. And, because his brother owns the photocopy shop.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's one of those. And so we were a little bit better off informed, but then again, it's not, I don't know that it was all that much more difficult. I just know that sometimes just arriving at the border cold turkey and wondering, are we going to get in today or not? It's all luck of the draw at this point.
Yeah.
Maps would have been nice. I think if there was anything out of all that I could choose to have had back then that we didn't have, would have been digital photography.
Yeah.
Because our photos are not, I've got some that were heat damaged because either it was all done in slide film, and either it was, the film was heat damaged before it was exposed, or it was heat damage after it was exposed, because sometimes it was months in between when we could get it actually processed.
Yeah.
Well, just for that to have survived the trip home and made it home with you is a miracle in itself.
Yeah.
Right.
Most people don't even get their luggage today. I can't imagine wondering where your stuff is back then. Well, before we get into the Sand Ship Discovery, which which is mostly what you talk about when you go to events and stuff. Let's go into a little bit of history. What led up to that? The horseback expedition in '57.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit of that story.
I don't know much of it. Lauren, let me back up even further.
Okay.
Lauren had decided early on, like he says, most people don't know what they want to be when they've graduated college, let alone when they're 8 years old. He knew when he was about 8 years old what he wanted to do for his life. Not specifically, but in general, he knew what he wanted to be. He knew he wanted to be an explorer. He wanted to go out and find things and do things that hadn't been done. And this was all back in what? He was born in 35, so somewhere in the mid, 40s. His older brothers were out on a camp out for the weekend. This was in Southern California. They all had donkeys, and Lauren kept pestering his dad, I want to go see the boys. I want to go see the boys. So his dad walked him out to where they were camping, just, a mile from the house probably, but that was the wilderness. And of course he arrives at this camp with these, teenage boys, and these teenage boys don't want him around. So his brother said, here, you take the donkeys and lead us home. So Lauren had the donkeys, and he's walking home, and he says the feeling that came over him at that time, leading these big boys out of the wilderness with the donkeys out there in front, that feeling never left him. And that's when he decided that's what he wanted to do. And that was where it started. And he did the horseback trip in 58, late 57. He started in late 57. Yeah, because his son had just been born. And that was kind of hard on him, but it was something that had been in planning for about a year and a half. So it was one of those things that it had to happen because of other people that were involved. And the idea was to go, the goal was to go from the lowest point in the Western Hemisphere, which would have been Death Valley, to the highest point in the Western Hemisphere, which would be Mount Aconcagua in
Argentina.
Peru, Argentina. It's right on the border, I think, between the two. And that was the dream. Well, they were out 10 months and they were only into Mexico. And he had gotten so sick with dysentery and I don't know what all. He was 6'4", in really good shape. He was only 20 some years old, probably weighed a good, 225, 250 pounds, somewhere in there. He muscular. He was in really good shape. And he was down to 149 pounds when he got back to the States.
Oh, wow.
So that he said he learned a lot from that lesson, mostly what not to do. And then when his son was about 8, 9 years old, one summer, I expect Connie and you absolutely kick ass. No pressure. Thank you. He and his son rode what they called at that time tote goats, which were tiny motorcycles with little fat tires on them. And again, they started in Death Valley and they were going into Mexico with them during Wyatt's summer break from school. And he said that they were gone 3 months. And in that 3-month time, Wyatt was, I think, 8 years old, 9 years old when they left. Maybe he was 8. He probably turned 9 in October. And he says he aged 3 or 4 or 5 years in that 3-month period because of all the experience he got and things that happened and what they did and the people they met and the places they stayed and that sort of thing. Just that experience had aged him, matured him. I shouldn't say aged, but matured him in a way that staying home wouldn't necessarily have done.
Yeah.
And then the next big trip was when he decided he was going to take one American-made vehicle around the world on a north-south course, all on land, except for the South Atlantic. And that was what he started in 75 and got down to Panama and started in 76 is when he started the Darien Gap in that Ford. And that's where Larry, one of the men that was with him, was shot and killed. They don't know what happened. There's several theories that were floating around. Lauren's personal theory is it was probably an accident by one of the natives. The natives have they all carry, well, they don't all carry, but most of them carry weapons for hunting. And they're not in the best of shape at all. They're not well maintained. I mean, the cook we had with us, he had a shotgun with him. If you looked at it wrong, it would kind of fall apart in your hands. It was just one of those things that you didn't want to go near if you didn't have to. So he thinks it was an accident, but that did put an end to that particular attempt. He couldn't go any further. It was just too hard on him. So he started out again in 77, driving a brand new Jeep, a CJ7, and he made it through the Darien Gap in 49 days, but he did about 10 to 12 miles lashed atop dugout canoes through the Atrado Swamp of Colombia. And it was not an all-land crossing, but the rains were coming and he wanted to get out. He didn't want to get stuck in the swamps during the rainy season. And that point became moot several weeks later because he lost that Jeep over a 300-foot embankment in the Ecuadorian Andes. Everyone on board was fine. It was a soft top. The top was ripped off, so everyone kind of was thrown free as it rolled, end for end down this embankment. And Lawrence, as he watched the headlights roll end for end, he was planning his next trip.
My goodness.
He started in 79 with another brand new Jeep, that time a CJ5, and got down into Panama. And this was 75, or excuse me, 85, 75, 77, 79. There we go. And Mark Smith, I don't know if you're familiar with Mark Smith and the Jeepers Jamboree out of California. He and I think they had 4 vehicles, were coming up from the tip of South America going north. And they went through the Darien Gap just a few weeks before Lauren did. And so when Lauren got down there, he had a practical freeway. They went through there with chainsaws and crews of 20 men. And it was great. He says all he had to do was winch hills that had to be winched. He did hardly any clearing. Got to the Colombian border, just over the Colombian border, and a Colombian park official said he needed permission to go through the park. And Lawrence, what do you mean I need permission? I mean, what's going on? He said, no, you need permission. Lawrence says, okay, what do I have to do to get permission? He said, we have to go to Bogota. And again, like we were talking earlier, this is not an easy thing. He's out in the middle of literally nowhere, calls a halt to the expedition. Men are on the payroll. He leaves. It was an 11-day round trip for him to go to Bogota. It was by walking boat, bigger boat, bus, and bigger bus to Bogota. They walked in the door, gave him the permission in 2 seconds, walked out, repeated his steps, and got back to the Jeep. We tried to find the park official on his way upriver, and they said he wasn't there. Got back to the Jeep, and he says, we're going to move. Rainy season's coming. We got to get out of here. And that afternoon or the next day, the park official showed up and says, you can't go. He says, I got the permission right here. I'll show it to you when I get to the top of the hill. They were winching. And he says, no. And Lawrence says, when I get there, I'll show it to you. So they showed him the paper. And he says, no, it's no good. It's no good. Lawrence says, what do you mean it's no good? And about then's when it dawned on Lauren, the guy wanted a payoff. Well, if he had negotiated a payoff 11 days before, they probably could have handled it. But the fact that the man told him that he needed permission, therefore Lauren went and got the permission. So at that point, Lauren was very upset, and he says, it's going to take more than you and your gun to stop me. I said, okay. Came back the next day with more men and more guns. So point was taken, and Lauren, that Jeep was left cabled to a tree on the Cocorica River. And
Wow.
That's so disturbing, and I've read enough books by Graham Bell about South American and South African travel, going from border to border, knowing how much of an issue it is, and I just can't imagine back then having to go through that. But you keep bringing up this term, the Darien Gap, and for those who do not know, explain what that is.
It's one of the few places in this world where there's 2 countries that touch, Panama and Colombia. And there's no other countries, of course, that border either one of them. They're surrounded by water after that, that you can't drive to. In just about every country that is bordering another country, there's a way to drive to that country. It may not be the best road. It may not be the most convenient road. It may not be a road in our sense of the definition of road, but it's drivable. The Darien Gap, there's nothing. You get down to the town of Yavisa in Panama, and the Pan American Highway stops. And even at that point, it's loosely called a highway. I mean, it's paved now all the way down to Yavisa, which it wasn't when we did it in '85. It was 179 miles, and that took the better part of 10 hours to drive.
Wow.
So now there is a road all the way down to Yavisa, and then there's a river, and that's it. There's no more roads. We clocked it at 125 miles at the direction we did. Other people say it's about 80 some miles. But our goal was to remain entirely on land. We would cross rivers, but we'd never travel up or down. So first thing you do is you have to cross the Tweeder River, and you've got a spit of about 4 miles of land, and then we had to cross the Chuquenake River, spit of land about 4 miles wide, and then you cross the Tweeder River. Some of the expeditions that go down there, they'll go down to the Chuquenake, and then they'll boat around that 4 mile spit of land because it's just 4 miles, and then go up the Tweeder River and start at the village of Pinogana and go on from there. Well, that's not necessarily all land. Our goal was we came to a river, we crossed it, we didn't travel up or down it to avoid anything.
Mm-hmm.
And
Wow.
that's why we did. Our odometer told us we had 125 miles and we came out at the village of Rio Sucio, which no other expedition had done. They came out on the Atrado River, and most of them then went by boat up some rivers to find dry land further. It would have been further east at that point. I'm trying to picture the map in my mind, but I think it would have been further east towards the Atlantic. They were able to find dry land by going up several rivers that way, where we ended up going further south and coming out on the Atrado. And we had found out by reconnaissance ahead of time that there was what they called a tractor trail from Rio Sucio out to a road. And that road was 38 miles, and that took us 10 hours to drive. It was so bad. It was just there'd been no vehicle. There'd been no vehicle in that village at all at the time we arrived with the Discovery. They sent the kids out of school to come down and watch us cross the river because there had never been a vehicle there. There'd been tractors, but never a vehicle.
Wow. So this was in 1984, right? When you went down with the Discovery?
Right. He started it at Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, June 15th, 1984. He got to Panama late October of 84. And a mutual friend says, "Hey, that guy's back." I had not seen or heard from him since 1977. So I said, "Who?" And he says, "The one that wanted to go through the Darien Gap." I says, "Oh, okay." So I went out and saw him. He was staying at the Jeep Club, the Isthmian Four-Wheeler Jeep Club. And I started helping him write letters, do some, again, paperwork type thing. And I would love that. If you've got a contact with Jeep, let me know.
Rick wants to know when you're going to make the trip again.
You pay, I'm going. I would. I seriously would. I'm not paying again. I forget where I was. Anyway, so in 84. So in 85, dry season, the only time you can really cross this area is dry season, which is December, January, February, maybe into March. Because otherwise it's the trails are too wet, the rivers are too high, and of course the Atrado Swamp, when you look at the map, it's indicated as a swamp. Well, that's only a swamp during rainy season, because we were able to find a dry land route through the swamp, which we were told that was impossible. Well, that's not a word in the vocabulary.
Yeah.
I mean, it was tricky, mind you, but we did find a route we could drive on with the Jeep.
When you talk about finding a route, were you having to like cut trees and make your own road?
Yes.
As you went? Okay.
We hired natives. Most of our guide had worked for Lauren in the past on one or both previous expeditions, Margarito. And smart man, can't read, can't write, doesn't speak English. He could sign his name. And okay was the only word he knew in English. And he was our main guide. Then we hired men as axemen to cut trail. Axes and machetes were all we used, because chainsaws are great, but now you've got something that's going to break down, that's got to have fuel, that's got to have maintenance, and that's got to have people that know how to use it. Everybody down there knows how to use an axe and a machete. Everyone down there knows how to sharpen an axe and a machete. All you need is a file. That's all we needed.
Yeah.
And it was easier if we came across too big a tree to cut down. We found a way to go around it. It was easier to go around it than to cut down big trees. A couple of times, some of the bigger trees we had to cut were ones that had fallen across the trail. We'd have a trail cleared. Men would go out ahead of time and clear the trail. I'd be in camp with the Jeep. Trail will be cleared, and in the middle of the night, you hear this crash, and a tree's fallen. And sure enough, it had fallen across the trail. And we had some fairly good sized trees that would have fallen across an already cleared trail that then took us, several hours to cut through, and then use the winch and move that section out of the way.
Wow.
Goodness, I bet your winch got a workout.
That Ramsey power takeoff was a lifesaver, absolute lifesaver. And, it was one of those things that I had been familiar with electric winches in the past, and then using the power takeoff. There's advantages to each one, but having, first of all, on the transmission, so we had 4 speeds, not that we ever used all 4. It was usually first and reverse. But having that capability, and then not having to worry about that battery, because sometimes we'd be winching for several hours.
Oh yeah.
Somehow I feel like my current winch is woefully inadequate.
What made you want to go and join this expedition after what had happened in the past?
I had always been interested in this type of thing. I've always liked reading books about, living stories of Stanley and Livingston and Burton and Shackleton, Burl Markham. These are all, what's the woman's name? Queen of the Desert. Oh, I can't think of her name right now. Gertrude Bell. These are all books that I read. These are all books that everyone, of course, this all took place, 100, 150 years ago, that sort of thing, maybe even further, but they were all books that inspired me, these people that did this sort of thing. And so that was, and I've always loved maps and seeing, my favorite toy as a kid was a globe. I remember my my globe with black water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed a globe when I was a kid. There was one in the library that I would just go and you find out where you were and find out where your grandparents lived and find out what's over here and that sort of thing.
I had to buy one when I started traveling the world. I had to buy one for my granny so I could show her exactly where I was going. That's the only way she could figure it out. What was his reaction when you told him you wanted to come down there and join him?
I actually
or did you just show up?
No, I was in Panama. I was in Panama at the time. Okay. And I was working, and I actually arranged for someone. I actually arranged for someone to be at my job for 30 days. I took leave without pay, because I knew that if I said I wanted to go, I had to go. It had to be a near death that would have to keep me out of that seat the day he pulled out. Lauren was the type of person that you do what you say and you say what you do. You're only as good as your word. Mm-hmm. So I knew this from Lauren, that I couldn't say, I'll go as your photographer. And then 6 weeks later or something, when we're getting ready to leave, I could say, and you know what? I forgot I got this appointment. I can't go. I just couldn't do that. So I had to make sure everything was absolutely perfect, that I had everything lined out so that when the time came, there was going to be no problem with me going. And I had that already kind of worked out. And then I said, I am going to go with you as your photographer, because he was looking for a photographer. And these trips were funded by a carpenter and a secretary.
By you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Self-funded.
No sponsorships back then, huh?
No. Lauren felt that he had to do something. And I totally, nowadays people are funded before they pull out of the driveway. I don't know how that's done. I'm having trouble with that. I've always had trouble with that. Lauren's philosophy was he had to do something to prove himself before he would ask someone to fund him. After we did the Darien Gap, we had that done. So when we got to South America, I wrote a lot of letters to a lot of Ramsey, and I don't think, maybe Ramsey didn't get one then, but I know that General Tyre did. And they agreed to send us, they were going to send us 4 new tires anywhere in South America, or was it going to be in Africa? I forget timing, but we didn't get the notice. We never got that letter until I think it was a year later. Somehow we finally got that letter from General Tire. So by then we had gotten, because we went through South America on literally a prayer on our tires. We arrived in South Africa and got Firestone there, agreed to give us, they agreed to sell us tires at $50 a piece. So we got 4 new tires from Firestone in South Africa for $50 a piece. So that's a form of sponsorship. The most in money that we got would have been the ship from South America to Africa. That was one that was probably, it probably saved us in the neighborhood of $6,000 at that time, because number one, the cost of shipping the Jeep to Africa, flying the 2 of us to Africa, and then us being without the house for 30 days, whether it would be in South America or South Africa, we were not going to have our home. We had to figure that cost in as well. And we figured it was about $6,000. And a shipping company agreed to ship all 3 of us on board a Greek freighter to South Africa from Chile. And we had to pay about $700, $900 or something for our food.
Did you? Wow. What happened to the rest of your crew when you went from South America to Africa?
Oh, these were all people that lived there in the Darien Gap. These were all locals that were hired from the village nearby, type of thing.
Okay.
They were not. Yeah. When we got to Rio Sucio, we had to go to, which was technically the end of the gap for us. That's where we found what we considered a road. The men we paid the men money, paid the men boat fare to go downriver to meet us in Turbo, which is a bigger town by far. And we would drive there and meet them. And at that point, when we got to Turbo, we then paid all the men off, and they all went back to their villages.
Okay. Did you pick up a new crew when you got to Africa?
No, Africa was strictly the 2 of us. That one was, Africa, there's a road.
Yeah.
Yarla. Yeah, Africa, there's a road, but again, it's not a road necessarily it's a very wide definition of a road.
Right.
It's, some of it was good. I think we clocked it in at 4,000 to 4,500 miles in 4-wheel drive in Africa. And that was over a period of about 6 months.
Wow.
And, tell us about the Guinness Book of World Records. What record did you set then?
That was for the first all land crossing by a vehicle of the Darien Gap. There's been other vehicle expeditions through the Darien Gap, but they've all traveled anywhere from probably 30 to 200 miles by river.
Wow. That's incredible. So tell us the end of the story. You almost make it to your goal, and then you had to stop.
Wait a minute.
You get to where you could see the end, but you couldn't get there because there was a conflict in the countries. Is that right?
Oh, okay. That would have been probably when we were in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Which is probably not too much different from today. When we were in order to remain entirely on land, we had to go through Sudan and then into Egypt. And then from Egypt, there's a tunnel under the Suez Canal into the Sinai. And from the Sinai, we went into Israel. We could not drive from Israel into Jordan when we were there in 1988. And at that time, the only other option was Lebanon, which was definitely out for Americans. This was 5 years after the bombing of the Marine Corps barracks in Beirut. So Americans were still not very welcome in Lebanon. And it wasn't that we weren't welcome in Jordan. It's just that the 2 countries on paper were at war. And we talked to Jordanian officials in other embassies before we got to Israel. And they said, you're not going to be able to do it because we don't have relations. It's just because of who we are in that part of the world. In order to keep peace with the other Arab nations, we have to have that border closed. So, yeah, we understood it, but we still tried. We got there. We tried. We spoke with UN. We said, look, paint it white, put a big blue UN on the Jeep. You drive it across that little tiny bridge that's, 30 yards across, and we'll fly around or boat around or whatever and pick it. And he says, we can't even drive our vehicles across the bridge. We have to walk across and get picked up by the United Nations office on the other side. So we could not get into Jordan. We had to go back into the Sinai into Egypt and take a boat up to Jordan, and then we could continue. But that's a water barrier. We crossed, that was not legitimate.
Right.
Mm.
We continued on. We finally ended the trip at Gamvik, Norway. Went through the old Soviet Union, big eye opener, and finished the trip at a little town called Gamvik, Norway, at a lighthouse. And we didn't know where we were going to be going. We didn't know where the end of the road was. We were just looking for the furthest road north. So we would just keep going from town to town on the north heading. And they said, oh yeah, there's another town up here, and there's another town up there. So we finally ended up at this little town of Gamvik, and at this lighthouse outside. And they said, yeah, you can't go any further. That was it. And nowadays, North Cap is further north, and we did go there, but that was a water crossing. You could only get there by ferry. It is further north. But now there's a bridge. I mean, if it had been a bridge back in the 80s, we would have done North Cap. But anyway, back to Israel. So that was always a thorn in our side, is that we didn't do it all on land. And in 2000, we thought we were going to go back. We were working in that direction. We had plans laid. We thought we'd go back the winter of 2000. And then Arafat blew up with another big intifada against the infidels and all this. So we thought, well, driving a red Jeep with California license plate may not be the best thing. Because one thing's for sure, California that was where Lauren was from. So, I mean, it still has the California tags on it. Everybody knew that. I mean, if it had said Illinois or Wisconsin or something, they probably would have scratched their heads and said, where is that? But, the fact that it was California, it was pretty obvious. So it was put on hold, and then life got in the way, work, health issues started arising, that sort of thing. And then in late 2017, our Lawrence, who was with us, Lauren's nephew that was with us on the first 30 days in the Darien Gap, he came and took the Jeep and re-outfitted it. She's not showroom by any means. She has all her dents still. She earned those dents. But new coat of paint, little bit of Bondo where the rust was really bad, new brakes, thank God, new wiring harness, things that she really needed. So we were going to go in late 2018. And our boss at the time, in late 2017, he says, no. He said, you need to go sooner rather than later. He would only see Lauren about every 4 or 5 months, because we took care of a home of his up here. So he wasn't here all the time. So he could see Lauren's health decline more than I could, being around him constantly. He says, you've got to go sooner rather than later. He says, I will put up all money for your trip to Israel as far as transportation costs. So he paid all transportation costs of the Sandship Discovery from Washington State to Israel and back again. And then our airfare round trip to Israel and back.
That's cool.
Wow.
And so on May 3rd, 2018, we drove from a road we were on in Israel, just outside the town of Eilat, across the border, the Yitzhak Rabin border, to a road we were on in Jordan. It's called Airport Street, and made a U-turn and came back, right back through the borders again and back into Israel.
That's so neat. Was there moments that you didn't think that you would make it on this trip?
Oh, yes. I think there were two. The first was they were actually both in Sudan, come to think of it. I had come down with malaria and didn't know what it was. I was just very, very sick. And we weren't in Khartoum yet. We were still out in the open desert headed towards Khartoum. And the only way I know what happened is I've read Lauren's journals, because I was out of it. I was running such a high fever. The inside of the Jeep, he had it made up so we could sleep inside. It was not comfortable, but and during the Darien Gap, I slept inside the whole time because it was primo conditions for me. 2 people in there is a little tight. So even in Africa, we slept outside a lot, but he could make up the bed in the inside and still drive. So he would drive and I was laying on the bed inside. And we had stopped at a Greek construction camp, and they had said, go to their head office in Khartoum. They'll know what to do. And they gave him a business card for their head office. So when he arrived in Khartoum, he saw a park with shade trees, because this was quite warm, parked under the shade trees, and got a taxi cab and says, look, I need you to take me to this address, but I need you to wait for me at that address because I don't know where my car's parked. I said, okay. So he took him to the Greek office, and he went up and talked to the man. They came down and talked to the taxi driver. Taxi driver said where Lauren had left the Jeep. They said, okay, we've got it from here, paid off the taxi driver. He says, she needs to get to the hospital. So they took Lauren back to the Jeep, got me to the hospital, and it was diagnosed as malaria and amoebic dysentery. And they admitted me. And it was later that day or the next day when my fever finally broke and I was semi-lucid. And I was in there for, I think, 3 days in the hospital.
Wow.
And then released. And then a couple of weeks later, we were on our way north towards Egypt. And everything was fine for the first few hundred miles, but the further north we went, we had to go up the west bank of the Nile because the border on the east bank of the Nile is or was, I should say, under contention between Egypt and Sudan. They couldn't figure out where their border was. And we had a letter from the Egyptian consulate in Khartoum stating that we had permission to cross the border from Sudan into Egypt on the West Bank. So we had to go up the West Bank, which was fine. And we always had the Nile River somewhere within a walking distance of us, not necessarily right next to us, but fairly close. This was late June, so it was rather warm, and it was our water supply, and we knew it flowed north. Our compass no longer worked, so we were down to Lauren using a pencil and looking at the sun and reading the shadows and trying to determine which way we were going, plus the river. And there was a rocky outcropping that came right down to the river's edge, and we couldn't get between the river and that rocky outcropping. So Lauren had to swing out into the desert to go around this outcropping, probably maybe a mile and a half out, and then swing back. And we broke an axle shaft. And we had already used the spare shaft back in Central African Republic. So we had front wheel drive only, and Jeeps and sand and front wheel drive don't necessarily do that well.
They don't G and haul very well, huh?
Mm-mm.
And we were able to use the winch and winch up into some brush to get a little bit of shade. And that night was really probably the scariest of the whole expedition, because we didn't know where we were. We knew nobody else knew where we were. Again, no GPS, no sat phone, no, these spot tracker things or whatever. None of that existed. So we took an inventory of what supplies we had, and Lawrence said, I want you to make a list of what you think we need to take with us, bare minimum, to get out of here. And I'll do the same, and we'll compare our lists. And we compared lists after working on this. He says, I don't want you to talk. I just want you to write down a list. And when we compared lists, we had everything about the same, except he had the inside rear view mirror of the Jeep. He was going to take that for a signaling device. And we thought, okay, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to walk so far, because we didn't know where the river was. We had no sight of the river at this point. We were going to have to walk so far, stash our supplies, walk back to the Jeep, get the rest of the supplies, walk up, and then just keep leapfrogging north as much as we could, or until we could find the river. And he said, I'll hike up to that mountain the next day and see if I can see how far the river is. So next morning he hiked up there, and the river was about a mile distance from where we broke down. And he walked down to the river, and it had a good current. We didn't know if we were far enough north to be on Lake Nasser, in which case there'd be no current. I had to leave the Jeep, secured it the best we could, put a letter on it saying, we've gone for help, got broken parts. This is our passport number. This is who owns the Jeep, blah, blah, blah. We will be back. And we have two big tin drawers that are probably 11, 12 inches deep by 17 inches wide and 33 inches long that fit in the tailgate of the Jeep that slide out. And those are our pots and pans and food supplies, that sort of thing. Used some Loctite silicone sealant, sealed up the seams. Lauren took some tamarisk branches and made outriggers. We took all the gas that we were carrying in jerry cans, dumped it in the tank of the Jeep, used the jerry cans as flotation devices on the outside of this outrigger. This box, this aluminum box, we put our supplies in, and Lauren and I, got in the river. Oh, we had a spare tube, a tire tube. We inflated that, tied it to the raft, and we called our little craft the SS Survival Ship Nile Queen. Still has her name on her. And we floated down the Nile River for 2.5 days till we found some form of civilization, which was one man in a cone tent. And he said that someone was going to come in a vehicle and take his produce up to the village late that night to the market. We said, "Could we get a ride?" He said, "Yes." So we stayed there the rest of the day and got a ride into the village of Wadi Halfa, which is a good-sized village there on the map. And from Wadi Halfa, we could get a train back to Khartoum. And we called the States, which is not an easy thing in a foreign country, especially Sudan. That was a 2-day, I think it was a 2-day process to call the States. And you could only make an international call from the Hilton Hotel. Called my mother, said, "We need these axles. This is who you have to call. This is the size. This is the number of teeth on it. This is, we gave her absolute specifications. You want to talk to Scotty, you want to talk to so-and-so, this is the number. You're going to send them to this man at the U.S. Embassy in Khartoum. Don't put our names on the package." And that was the end of it. And Lauren says, "I don't want to leave the Discovery out there all by herself." He says, "It's come too far and means too much to have something to happen to her." He bought 6 weeks worth of food, got on the train, went back to Khartoum or back to Wadi Halfa, hired a couple of people in Wadi Halfa to take him up by dugout, small boat upriver to where he knew the Jeep was parked. And that's where he stayed, was at Broken Axle Camp. I stayed in Khartoum waiting for the parts to arrive. 11 days after my mother sent them, I had them in my hands.
Wow.
However, the rains had come and the Nile went into flood, first time since the 40s, I think it was, and the railroad tracks were washed out going north. There was no way for me to get out I could take an international flight out of Khartoum, but that's all I could do. There was no other way for me to get out of Khartoum. I spent 2 weeks knocking on doors, government, police, NGOs, you name it. I talked to them and said, "Is there any way I can get to Wadi Halfa?" And finally, it was through one of the NGOs. They said, "We're flying relief supplies up. The Belgium Air Force has loaned us a C-130. They're flying them up tomorrow morning to Wadi Halfa. You can be on board." And they said, "Be out on the street corner at 7 o'clock in the morning." And I was out there at 6 o'clock in the morning with my axle shafts and and flew to Wadi Halfa, and then hired these same people to take me upriver to where Broken Axle Camp was. And it was a 15-minute repair job. We'd gone to free-floating axles after having axle problems in the Darien Gap. Jack it up, you undo those 6 bolts, take that hub flange off, put the new axle shaft on, put the flange, the bolts, bingo, you're done. 15 minutes.
Yeah,
we were down.
You had no way of communicating with him.
No, absolutely none. He could tell the river was rising, and he could see that it now looked like chocolate milk. So he knew that there was something up, that he didn't know the railroad tracks were washed out, but he knew something was definitely not right. He just didn't know what it was. And of course, I had no way of letting him know that, everything's fine. I got him. I just can't get out of Dodge.
Right. That's just how the society we live in today, we've become so dependent on communication, quick, right now communication.
Oh, yeah.
You guys were weeks away from each other and have no idea.
No, I mean, and everything's done in the journals. I'll be writing to Lauren in my journal, telling him about my day and saying, I can't get there, but this is what's happened so far. These are who I've talked to. This is what's going on. Talk to, Abdul down on the corner to see if he had any camel trains going north. That sort of thing. So, yeah.
Patty, my mind is just blown right now. I just
Yeah, to be out there like he was and not to have any word of what in the world is going on,
Yeah.
but yet he stayed there.
Mhm.
That just blows my mind about how he actually stayed there and waited on you to get there.
I
Well,
mean,
he,
that's gotta weigh on you mentally. You
yeah, it
know, at
does.
some point, you don't
Each
you
one knew that each one knew that,
Mhm.
they were depending on the other one to do their job.
exactly.
I was depending on him to stay there and watch the home front, and he was depending on me to show up with axle shafts. So, I mean, we each knew, but there's that mental stress that how do I let him know that everything's okay? And he was going under the same thing. How do I let her know that I'm fine? Because I was worried now, was his 6 weeks worth of supplies of food beginning to dwindle? And
Mm.
he had already, and he, like I said, he knew something was up with the river. So he had actually started cutting back on his rations. And when I got there, I've got a picture I show in the slideshow. I say he's got a great tan, but he lost a little bit of weight. He's standing there, he's in shorts, and you can see all his ribs.
My goodness.
Yeah.
That's a level of mental toughness that is just insane to me. Like I can't wrap my head around that. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
That
Not,
also
I mean, not in a bad way. I mean, I'm just saying
Yeah.
it's like,
Oh, yeah.
that
what?
also speaks to a love for vehicle
Right.
and how you bond with a vehicle. You want to go
Oh,
back and
you bet. I mean, she has a personality. She's temperamental. She's faithful, but it meant a lot. Lauren was doing this in
Yeah.
one American-made vehicle, not a series of American-made vehicles, and he'd
Yeah.
gotten that far, and he couldn't let anything happen to her to knock that down.
Wow.
one thing I thought about when I was thinking about this and going through the stuff and trying to picture your travels, especially through South America. Everybody has always talked, and it's actually been a fact. When you go to Mexico, don't drink the water. The
Hmm.
water's not good. How, these days, like this past weekend, I was in Arkansas and I was filtering water out of streams that I could see through.
Hmm.
Crystal clear water. How did you make sure that y'all had good, clean water and your food was clean and all that?
I think most of South America, we were drinking tap water. I
Wow.
can't re- I can't say that when I went to Mexico with Lauren in 2018, 17, 17, I think it was, we bought bottled water.
Hmm.
I don't know what he did through Central America. Once we got to South America, we usually filled up a 5-gallon jug at a gas station, and that
Hmm.
was our drinking water. And if we had tea, I did boil it, but we still, drank the water. Now, in Africa, we boiled it or we pilled it. We still had halazone pills from the Darien Gap, and we would pill it. Um, and then when we got to Wadi Halfa, after we broke down, we ran out of our halazone pills, and we had no way of purifying our water when we were staying in this little thing they called a hotel.
Hmm.
When you both trust that you do what you say you will do? I'm sure that helps. Yes. With another person you both know, you rely on each other. True, true, very true. Um, but we were sitting there on our beds, if you want to call them that, and we had to drink the water that they had at the hotel, which was in crocks that was brought up from the Nile River and just put into these crocks. And the crocks, of course, allow the water to cool through evaporation through the pores of these clay crocks. So the water was nice and cool.
Hmm.
It just looked like weak tea because that was the color of the water.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And we sat there and we had white enamel cups and we're looking at it thinking, okay, we got to do this because we need the drink. And we did.
Yeah.
And I mean, we had no problems, but I mean, it's not to say that, it was probably the best thing to do. But again, when you don't have a way of purifying it,
Hmm.
that was it.
Well, we mentioned earlier that in doing this, you set a Guinness World Record. How did the public and the media react to your accomplishment when you got back? How did you let them know what you'd done?
No, we really didn't. I mean, we did some newspaper interviews, that sort of thing. I wrote a magazine article. There really wasn't that big a nothing over it. I've had more in the past 2 years because I've made a point of getting out there and going to overland shows and expos and Jeep shows and Jeep rallies, that sort of thing. and doing slide presentations, showing the Jeep, telling about, showing them how the bed makes up, showing them underneath the hood where he's got the shovel stored and the axe stored, and all these things, the places that he's tucked stuff in around the engine compartment. So I mean, being able to see the slideshow and then go over and look at the Jeep and put hands on and have them, and people can sit in it. This is nothing. I'm not worried about you people sitting in my Jeep. It's not going to hurt anything. Crap. Someone says, can we touch her? Can we open? Yeah, open the doors, look inside, sit in there if you want to. Yeah. So it's only been in the last 2 years, and it was something that Lauren and I talked about doing. But with his health, it got very bad there the last few years. He says, well, when we retire, this is what we'll do. Well, he was also saying, he didn't want me to quit. He says, you got to keep working. You need to keep working. So I kept working right up until literally a month before he passed. I was taking care of him almost full time and working. And I just had to, I finally told the boss in July 4th, and Lauren passed in August. I said, I can't do it anymore. I can't do both. I'm cheating both of you right now because I can't give both of you what you need. And I said, I've got to quit. And he totally understood, which was, we had a great boss. He's family.
Yeah.
Well, that's totally different. Now today when people do things like this, you can follow every step that they make. And,
right.
So to be able to hear what you did completely after the fact, and you remember so many details about it, it's good that you kept journals so that you can remember everything, all the places and times and stuff. So that's incredible. Now your husband, Lauren, he passed away in 2022. How do you want everybody to remember him?
I would say he would want them to remember him as somebody who said what he was going to do and did what he said he was going to do. Honorable, a man, not a handshake, your word. A handshake's okay, but it's your word that's going to do it.
Yeah.
Look a man in the eye and tell him, and that's what works.
Yeah. Well, most people know you from going around and attending events, sharing your story, doing classes, and telling stuff like that. You do that. You mentioned earlier that you're going to be going to Overland Expo West here in just a month or so. Now you're embarking on a new challenge, the Rebel Rally. Are you excited about this?
Apprehensive, yes. Excited, yes. Scared, definitely. All of the above. Yeah. It's one of those things that, again, I feel prepared in that I am going to see it through. One way or the other, we'll compete. We'll do it. There's no question there. How bad we're going to be at it or how good we're going to be at it will be seen on the last day.
Yeah. Right. Tell us about your partner,
Connie Rodman. She's avid off-roader to a degree, not necessarily. She's done a lot here in the States, but her primary off-roading with her husband, Graham Jackson, was they spent several months in South Africa, Botswana, Namibia, overlanding, and she had never done that sort of thing. So that was her initiation into it. And then, she thought, oh, this isn't that bad. So then they did London to Cape Town overland. And she's done that. I think she's done other trips in South Africa, in Africa. And then she's done, and I don't have my paperwork in front of me. You'll have to go to our website. There's a short bio on there. Australia. She's done a lot of overlanding with her husband in Australia. That's where I'm going to rely on her dune driving experiences from there.
Have you ever done anything like a race before?
No. No.
Slow and easy is the CJ5.
And see, that's the nice thing about that is one of the nice things about the Rebel. It's not a race. We're not out there racing. We are competing. But there are timed events in that you have to be at certain places by a certain time. But it's more precision navigation than anything else. And it's all done old school, compass maps, plotter scales. your phone, your cell phone are all locked up in a tamper-proof box. Your GPS on your car has been disabled. So yeah, you're relying on your wits basically to get you through.
What vehicle are you driving? What will y'all be competing in?
That I did get that. So yeah, prepared for that question. The 2023 JL Wrangler Rubicon that AEV is loaning us.
Oh wow, that's so cool.
Nice.
Yes, it's and this was Connie and I met after got together, I should say, after Expo Mountain West there near in Colorado.
Yeah.
She lives in near Denver. And I went to her house after that. We sat around chatting and talking and doing budgets and how we're going to get this and how we're going to get that. And she says, well, we got to get a vehicle. And we said, yeah, how do we do that? And we knew we wanted a Jeep because we wanted to use my story to try and interest Jeep in either loaning us a Jeep, giving us a Jeep, letting us buy a Jeep for $1 or whatever legalities need to be done. So we were fine tuning a letter to Jeep and working on this. And she says, fall back. She's got a vehicle or two that we could choose from that, she's familiar with that they could use. And I said, okay. And we were going ahead with, of course, I was still doing Overland Expos and stuff like that. So it was kind of difficult for me to get anything paperwork done. So I was still, working with getting ideas how to form this letter to Jeep so we could best interest them in it. And we were standing at Overland Expo East in Virginia, it was in October of last year. So a month and a half after Mountain West. And we're standing around on Thursday night. The expo hadn't even started. We're at happy hour talking, and there's a group of us. And Connie looks at me. She says, hey. I said, what? She says, we've got a vehicle. And I said, what? She says, no, we've got a vehicle. And she points across this circle of people that we're standing with. And Matt Feldman is there. And he says, yes, you've got a vehicle for the Rebelle. And I mean, it was like, I said, I don't know who you are, but thank you. And I just hugged.
That just made all of my skin crawl, Patty. That is amazing.
And it's amazing. Like, we thought, okay, now all we have to do is raise the funds, which is not cheap. But my philosophy is everybody has a little bit of money they might be able to donate, but not everybody has a vehicle they're willing to let you use.
Yeah. So true.
So that was like one of the biggest weights taken off our shoulders when he came forward with that. In fact, I got my AV shirt on.
Nice.
And we hope to have it by early April so that we'll have it for the first training session in Ocotillo Wells in mid-April.
That's
right so on.
And that's then the plan is then at several of the expos, I'll have the Sandship Discovery on display with, as Matt's calling it, the SSD2, Sandship Discovery 2, because that he wants it to look as close, how you can make a 2023 look like a 1966, who's to say? But anyway, it's red. He's painted the rims red, which match our Discovery, but we'll be at the AEV booth and have both of the vehicles there on display.
Right. Nice.
I'm going to type in true.com. I'm going to type in and put this is the website that you have, the TNT-triedandtrue.com. This is where you can go and support Team 114, the TNT Tried and True team of Patty and Connie Rodman. They have a link on here where you can go and you can donate or you can buy things that will help support them. There's several different ways that you can do that. It has a short bio of each of them. And it also has the sponsors that they have and all that. So you can also follow them on Instagram at TNT Tried and True and follow the every step. So we encourage everybody to do that. Go and support them. And
please.
Yeah, it'd be fun to watch you. And also you can look at the Rebelle Rally stuff, and there is ways that you can follow everybody each day when that happens in the fall. So it's very
the public's able to tune in and see where we are. We may not know where we are, but everyone in the world that's watching it online can see the little dot there. That's team 114, and they're lost. They're way the hell out of the way. They should be over here. You know? Go back that way.
Go back. Well, I'm screaming at the TV all the time, so that'll be right up my alley.
That'll be right fitting for you, huh?
Yeah, that's perfect. Well, Miss Patty, thank you so much for coming on and sharing us a little bit about yourself, your husband,
Thank you.
the expeditions, and everything. We're honored that you have.
Well, thank
Yep.
you so much. I really appreciate this. I appreciate your time. Appreciate getting the word out there, and hope to meet, some of these people that, I've recognized a lot of the names, some of the names I didn't recognize. So if they're anywhere, you've proven you don't need a map. True. I mean, we'll find out about that. But yeah, when you're finding a geographic point, I'm going to need a map.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd like to meet some of the people that I haven't met. I'm always welcome to, love to talk to them and be able to show them the Jeep and the slides and
Right on.
share the story. And they're welcome to share the story as much as they can. The more it gets out there, the better for me. And Misty, who's working, I should say I'm working with her. She's doing the writing of the book, and I'm doing the talking, and we're working on it.
Right
That's
on.
great.
That's cool.
Great. Well, thank you for everybody who joined us live this evening. Thank you for everybody who came on and asked questions and participated. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Get out there and go to tnt-triedandtrue.com and give Miss Patty and Connie a support and do whatever they can and follow them. Hope you all have a wonderful week. Get outside, learn something new, get involved, and do something cool. I hope everybody has a great week outside. Enjoy the nice weather that's about to come in the spring. Tony, good to see you. Miss Patty,
too,
stick
buddy.
around. We're fixing to be
Thank you.